We need to talk. Men are facing a crisis. How many men do you think die by suicide each day around the world? Have a guess? Under 5? Under 10? Under 20? It's 88. That's 3 men an hour. By the time you go to sleep tonight, we're going to lose 88 men to suicide. We don't talk about the fact that 76% of all suicides are male, and that this silent killer is claiming the lives of more men under 45 than anything else. And I can't help but find myself asking, why is that? Doesn't that trouble you? Because it troubles me. These are our fathers, sons, uncles, partners. These are our friends, and they decide to die. I think there are some hard questions we need to ask about male suicide. I don't believe there's anything wrong with men having suicidal thoughts, but is there something wrong with how we react to suicide? We all die at one point or another, right? Our bodies will fail us. We'll die of disease or old age. Or we'll have our lives taken from us, maybe in a tragic accident. Isn't it perfectly normal to contemplate having control over our own lives, including the choice of whether to continue living or not? Yes, suicide is intentional, but does that automatically make it wrong? I believe suicide is preventable, and I believe we should do everything in our power to prevent it. But I also believe there's nothing inherently wrong in thinking about our own death. I've considered what it's like to die. I'd like to ask you to think to yourself if you've ever had a really bad day that's left you feeling maybe stressed or upset. Did that bad day or bad week or bad month ever lead you to think about harming yourself or taking your own life? On average, about half of you would have said yes. I invite you to consider what might be different if we didn't see having suicidal thoughts as wrong, and what that might mean for the men in our lives thinking of suicide. We still struggle to talk about it. We label it as abnormal or unusual, and we make men wrong for having suicidal thoughts. We say that they're unwell or that they need to get better. And because we think of it this way, it stops us from being able to talk about it, and we stay silent instead. And suicide remains shrouded in this stigma. That stigma is only perpetuated by irresponsible and sensationalized journalism that happens in the cases of celebrity suicide. Just look at some of the reporting around Anthony Bourdain's death. When I was thinking about how best to explain this point, it made me think about sex and sex education. Hold on, stay with me. It's uncomfortable for us to talk to our kids about sex. It's tempting to think if we don't talk about it, it won't happen. Our kids won't have sex. But we know that teenage pregnancy and STIs are the risks if we don't have that conversation, and we take those risks seriously. We introduced sex education into schools, and, it's far from perfect. But what it has been shown to do is to improve positive attitudes towards safe sex, to delay sex, and to reduce teenage pregnancy when used alongside other methods. Just last month, I was chatting to a female friend of mine who described the guy she was dating as a sponge and too sensitive because he opened up to her about some of the anxieties he was facing in the relationship and how that was making him feel vulnerable. It's somewhere between discomfort and disdain. Men are already making themselves wrong for not living up to these masculine ideals of being strong, dependable, and able to provide for their families. Men are already shaming themselves for that, but women are compounding the problem by making men wrong and shaming them for demonstrating those open and vulnerable behaviors that they say they want us to show. I don't have the answers, but I am inviting you to consider the questions, because I don't believe there is anything wrong with men having suicidal thoughts, but perhaps there is something wrong with how we react to that and our expectations of men in society. So, what would happen if we all have the courage to go home tonight and have conversations with the men in our lives about how they're feeling and what they're thinking, including their suicidal thoughts. Yeah, it's going to be uncomfortable, I get that. But we do it with sex. Every parent dreads having that conversation with their kids about how babies are made. I get that. But we know it's important to keep our kids safe, so we do it anyway, no matter how uncomfortable we feel. If you have been having suicidal thoughts, talk to someone. Talk to friends, parents, partners, brothers, sisters. Talk to someone. No one should have to go through thoughts of suicide, but no one should have to go through losing someone to suicide. If you are struggling at all, there are some resources in the description that I would like you to take a look at. You are not alone.